Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome to Thursday, the day that's not Friday, but it's very close to it. What's that? Almost there. It's very close. And don't forget you'll have, well, you don't have a short week next week, but you have a holiday in the middle of next week, which is Wednesday. Not ideal, but I guess we'll take it.
It's a one-day holiday?
What's that?
One-day holiday?
It's a one-day holiday.
Wow.
Not to be extended to 2 or 3 days on either side. It's a single day holiday. Anybody paying attention to election stuff still? Yeah.
But it's not moving.
It's not moving, yeah. Morning, Chan.
People say the votes are being thrown out or something like that.
Yeah, what people are saying that. What people are saying that.
Because they saw like a video of like the guy counting votes and he just crumpled paper and threw it away.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how legitimate that is. Hello. Usually when you have a vote like this, you have scrutineers. Have you heard scrutineers before? Yeah, so if you have an election, and really any kind of election, often what you have is you have people collecting the votes, right? And then the voting is over and the votes have to be counted. So there's people counting the votes, and usually you have people from either side watching. So in this case, the Republicans and the Democrats will both have people who will watch the counting of the votes to make sure that nothing funny happens, right? And so, yeah, at every place, as far as I know anyway, at every place where the voting is happening, there's someone who's representing each party, watching the process, making sure that it's done correctly. Not that you can't trust these people, but just as an added layer of security, right? So, yeah, I don't think people are crumpling out votes or throwing out votes because the scrutineers would be like, hey, cut that out, right? That's not procedure, right? So, I don't know. There's
A video of it.
Yeah, but you can make a video of everything, of anything, right? And I'm a little hesitant to believe that, especially since one side has been claiming voter fraud for years, even in the absence of any evidence of voter fraud at all. And so there's all kinds of crazy claims out there about, secret ballots showing up and, ballots being dumped in and, I don't know. There's all kinds of strange accusations going on, and I don't think any of it is based in fact. And again, usually these elections kind of go pretty well. The U.S. has been doing elections for a long time. Not that there aren't problems with their elections, because there are, but I don't know. I know there's a video, George, but I would need more than the video to believe that that's what's going on. The other thing is that sometimes votes are not countable, right? So people can fill out the ballot. If you fill out the ballot incorrectly, then your ballot can't be counted in some cases. Some people choose to destroy their ballot. And so if they want to, sometimes people make a statement by not voting, and so they go in and they just draw a line through everything and then deposit their ballot. So they're basically saying, I don't want any of this. Screw you all. And so sometimes people will purposely do that. Not very often, but sometimes. And so, yeah, some ballots are void. They're not countable because they've been filled out in an unclear way. Like if you check Trump and Biden, then no, right? Your ballot gets thrown out because it's you screwed it up, right? You can only choose one or the other. And so, yeah, some ballots are not countable, but as long as people fill them out correctly, they all are. And unfortunately, we just have to wait and bite our nails until Nevada finally.
I think Biden's win for sure. Like he's closing the gap in Georgia.
Yeah.
He's closing the gap in Georgia now?
Yeah, only like 0.3% now. And most of the mail-in ballot is for Biden.
Yeah, but Georgia's almost done, right? They're like 97% counted.
Yeah, around like almost.
Just need 6.
You just need 6 electoral votes. That's all, people. Just a mere 6. Can we not do that? Can we not give this man his 6 electoral votes and move on with our lives? I don't know. Not until all the ballots are counted. So gosh, 76% from Nevada. Still slow. Georgia's 99%, but it looks like it's going to be Trump, but he only leads by 0.3 points.
Yeah, and most of the mail-in are Biden.
Yeah, but it's 99% done. Like, wow. How many votes have actually been cast? It's about 40,000 votes difference. I don't know. I don't know if that's winnable by Biden or not. I have to do the math. What else do we have here?
Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
Most important
North Carolina. Trump's leading by 2 points in Pennsylvania. They've got 88% of their vote counted. Let me just see what that means.
Yeah, Biden just only need Nevada.
Trump's ahead by about 100,000 votes.
Wait, so who's winning?
Who's winning? Biden is winning.
Yeah, just only like Nevada.
Yeah.
Is it like neck to neck or?
It's this. Kanye got 60,000 votes.
Yeah, Kanye.
Kanye. Whoops. I know that's a little bit tiny on the screen there, but that's currently what it looks like. Actually, that's in Pennsylvania. Hang on one sec. Yeah. So that's currently the situation.
But he needs 6 more votes.
Yeah, Biden needs 6 more electoral votes.
Where are those votes?
Where are they?
No, what are electoral votes?
It's like the state represent the vote. Like example, like California has like 10 million people, but if 5.1 million people vote, so like winner takes all, like 55 votes. Yeah, the winner takes all.
It's a weird system.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Like in California, like for example, like if there's 10 million people and then 4.9 million people vote for Trump, but 5.1 vote for Biden, like the 4.9 million vote like doesn't count.
So is this like 6 more points for Biden? It's like there's no chance for Trump or?
It's over.
If things go the way they look look like they're going to go. And so here you can see, the dark blue and the dark red are ones that are pretty much settled. There's no way that, like in a red state, there's no way that Trump can, or there's no way that Biden can win now because he just doesn't have the votes. But the ones that are kind of lightly shaded could still go either way. So it looks as if Trump is going to win Pennsylvania and North Carolina and Georgia, although he might not, but it looks that way based on the numbers. And it looks as if Biden is going to win Nevada, but we're not sure yet. So if everything goes the way that this map says it does, then Biden's going to win. But Trump's going to get close, right? Because because he's got 214, and so Pennsylvania's got 20 votes, so that's 34, 44, 49, 59, 65, 66, 67, 68. That's Alaska. So if everything goes the way that this map says it's going to go, Trump will finish with 268 electoral votes, and Biden will finish with 270. So it'll come down to 2 electoral votes, which is not much. And if you look at the votes cast, well, actually Biden has a reasonable lead now, 4 million votes. But still, that's not much in a nation of 330 million people, I think.
Who do you think is the best president?
What's that?
Who do you think is the best president?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know them all. I don't know them all well enough.
I think
And
it's
it's-
a voting system. Like, I hate this voting system. Why don't they just do it like Canada? Like just take the popular vote.
I don't know.
Yeah, like this system is so bad.
I don't know. I don't know too much about. I don't know too much about the electoral college system beyond how it works. My very basic understanding is that it was something that they put into place very early in the United States history, and it was into the Constitution. And so they put it into the Constitution, and then there were attempts later on to change it, but changing constitutions is difficult. You usually need like a super majority of people to agree, like 2/3 of people, and they could never get anyone to agree on, they could never get that much agreement on a new system, so they just wound up kind of stuck with it. And so I think it was supposed to be, just a temporary measure for now, and then they were going to come up with something better, but they never were able to come up with something better that everyone agreed on. And so it just kind of stuck. And so they're still using it. And so, yeah, obviously Canada doesn't use. We use a no. We don't use a popular vote.
Really? I thought every vote counted.
Every vote, well, yes and no. Some votes don't count in a different way, right? So you said if we look at California, because that's the one you mentioned.
It doesn't count anymore. You know?
Yeah, so there's in California here, Biden has won California with nearly 8 million votes. Trump only got about 4 million votes. But yeah, in a way, those 4 million votes don't count anymore, because Biden won the state, and he gets those 55 electoral votes towards him, right? But a similar thing happens in Canada here, right? And so here we just had a provincial election, right? So this is, I think this is Mount Pleasant. I forget what this riding is called, but it's Mount Pleasant. And so people in this area voted for their candidates. So there was an NDP candidate and a Green and a Liberal candidate and probably someone else. And there might be a Conservative candidate here as well. And the winner was Melanie Mark. And so Melanie Mark is the NDP candidate. She's also the Minister of Advanced Education, actually. But all the people who didn't vote for Melanie Mark, in a way, their votes don't count now, because they voted for a candidate who's unsuccessful, and Melanie's a successful candidate. So in a way, both systems have that problem, is that if your candidate doesn't win, your votes are kind of not, in a way, they don't really count. They're not representative. And so that's a problem with both systems. And so some people have recommended other systems for Canada in the past, like something that's more proportional representation or more based on popular votes, so that if 30% of the country votes NDP, that 30% of the government should be NDP. But we haven't managed to reform our electoral system yet, because this system and our system in Canada tends to, whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. Both of those systems tend to privilege larger parties, okay? So often, like in BC's election, the Green Party might get 10 or 12% of the vote. I forget what they got in the last election. But in theory, that would mean maybe 4 or 5 seats in legislature. But really, in practice, they usually only get 1, because they don't usually get enough votes in one riding to actually win a seat. And so the smaller parties they wind up underrepresented. Remember, underrepresented and overrepresented? Smaller parties are underrepresented. Larger parties are overrepresented with the system that we currently have. And so we could change it, but are larger parties interested in doing that? No. Not so much. It doesn't really help them. And so again, here in BC and federally as well, there have been a question, should we change our electoral system? And in both cases, the government kind of wiggled out of it and managed not to do anything. So yeah, we currently have what we have. So there's an element of their system, or a weakness of their system is present in our system as well, but we don't have this kind of electoral college nonsense going on. But anyway, it's close. So if everything goes the way that map says, it's going to be Biden by a nose, as they say. But either way, it doesn't matter. You don't have to win by a lot. You just have to win, right?
Well,
so.
is it possible to get a draw?
No. If you've built your democratic system properly, you don't want draws. You always have to have an uneven number of things, or you have to have some way so that you get a majority. You don't want a tie. Ties are not good.
What happens if you get a
What happens? What? I don't think it can happen.
Yeah, like,
I think the electoral votes are created in a way that you can't get an even split.
yeah, it's even. The number is even. There's no way you can
Two
divide.
presidents. Two presidents.
2 presidents. It's actually not a bad idea. Some places have done that. If you go back to ancient Rome had, well, before it turned into an empire, they had 2 consuls. And they had 2 consuls for that reason, because they didn't want to give all of that power to one person. And so the 2 consuls they were kind of like 2 presidents, and they had to agree with each other in order to make decisions and do things. So the Romans actually created a system with effectively 2 presidents rather than 1. But I can't imagine Trump and Biden agreeing on anything or getting anything done. But yeah, but that system has been done before in the ancient world anyway. Sparta as well. Sparta had 2 kings all the time as well, if you're interested in that sort of thing. One would go off to battle and one would stay home just in case the king who was in battle was killed. So they'd always have one. Anyway, that was a little bit of a tangent. Anyway, Sala's here. Good morning, Sala. And Adal's here. Hello. Good evening to you, Vicky. Good morning to you, Daniel, or good evening to you, Daniel. Actually, it's probably morning for you. Mike's here. Good morning, Mike. Good morning, Clara. Good morning, John. Sabrina's here. Hello, Sabrina. And George is here. Good morning, George. And good morning, Kanye. If you're watching, give it up. Kanye 2024 is not going to happen. Just go back to your music and your sneakers. Miles is here. Good morning, Miles. Morning, Jack. Yeah. No shade on Kanye, but
Are you also happy when you get like the 6,000 votes?
am I happy?
No, Kanye.
Oh, I'm sure he's happy. Oh, and
He didn't win, but he's happy.
Kennan's here as well. Hello.
Why would anyone vote for him? Why would anyone vote?
I don't know. I don't know.
I don't
But like I say, I think he should stick to music and shoes. I don't think
Easy for president.
I don't think Commander-in-Chief is a good fit for him. It is a weird concept. But we're living in a weird time. It's a weird period of history. Wait till you can tell your kids about this. Kids, back in my day, we almost had a hip hop artist as a president. No, we didn't almost have that. Okay. Back to racism. So yesterday I had you read an article that apparently was a little bit on the long side, but wasn't super on the complicated side. But there's lots of stuff in it, right? And we said that it was kind of coming from a position of the experience of First Nations people in Canada, which some of you may know a little bit about and some of you may not. I'll try and fill in some of those gaps for you, not today, but maybe tomorrow or Monday. But you're hearing some of those things pop up in this article, and again, they may ring a bell for you or they may not, but we'll see about that. Just in general, I'm gonna combine maybe questions 1 and 2 and 3 here into one question when I ask you, how does race kind of come about? Like, why do people create this social category called race in the first place?
Big identity.
To make identity, yeah. So it gives people an identity.
Keep the power superior.
Right, as a justification for power for dominant groups, right? And so particularly in Western Europe, but maybe more particularly in North and South, maybe North America in particular, in the US and Canada, white people become the dominant group. They kind of roll in here with their fancy technology and their, greed for riches. They take over this land, they make it their own. They create 2 countries, the US and Canada. And indigenous people are sort of pushed to the side, right? And in the United States, although in Canada as well, although to a lesser degree, Africans are brought to these shores in order to work in sugarcane plantations and cotton plantations and tobacco plantations. And so the economy of the US certainly is kind of originally founded on slave labor, right? And so creating these racial classifications and then creating a system whereby some races were superior than others kind of gives you the ability to treat other people differently, right? You can't create a country like the US and say liberty and justice for all and then deny it to some people. That's kind of an awkward that's an awkward contradiction, right? You need a reason to deny some people this freedom and equality and justice. And again, the reason they come up with is that, oh, these people here who are this color, they're less than us, right? They're inferior. They're not as intelligent. They're not as hardworking. They're not as moral or ethical. And it actually went so far as to be described in some ways as the white man's burden. And so the white man's burden was to civilize all of these people who were less civilized than themselves, right? And so this kind of, this was, colonization and missionaries and, kind of bringing people to the United States for labor. All of these things were in part justified by, oh, this is white people doing these people a favor, right? We're living this civilized life. They're living this sort of inferior, savage life, but we're going to help them. We're going to bring them up to our level. We're going to civilize them, right? And so all of these kind of ideas were baked into the ideology of race and what race was. Some of these things had religious backing because, of course, missionaries were trying to civilize other cultures around the world and in the United States. And so, yeah, this race thing is kind of created in order to justify colonizers, white people, justify them being in power and justify the treatment of peoples of color that they come in contact with, right? We said there were 5 beliefs of race-based societies. Tell me what those were.
Biology.
Biology. What about biology?
Like it's in our biology that we differ among other people.
Right. So the idea that race is based in biology and that there is a real biological difference between the races, right? And of course, we've said that that's not true. There's no races. There's no biological races in humans at all. But race-based societies think there are, and think that there are differences between races that are rooted in biology. What's the second one?
Distinct culture, which is also based in biology.
Right. So every race has a distinct culture, and that is based in biology as well. And we said that culture isn't transmitted biologically, right? It's transmitted socially. And of course, there's no real biological difference between races anyway. So that couldn't affect people's culture because it doesn't exist to start with, right? So that's bizarre as well. What's the third one?
Race is unchangeable.
Right, that racial differences are enduring and unchangeable, right? And so if you belong to a certain race, race-based societies say that certain races are like this, and you are now like this, and you can't change that, right? Which is, again, not true. What else? What's the last one?
Naturally being superior to others.
Right, some races are naturally superior to others. That's what these race-based societies argue. And of course, unsurprisingly, it's usually white people who are placed at the top. And the last one?
Should be written in regulation.
Yeah, and so race-based societies believe that these differences in race are real and meaningful, and so society needs to be structured to take that into account, right? And so, yes. What have scientists confirmed about race?
None of that is true.
Basically, yeah. None of that is true. What kind of things do they say about the biology of race? In terms of genetic variability?
And some of them are biased and aggressive kind. Do you mean that one?
No, not that one. Yeah. The genetic differences between people are exceedingly minor, right? We all share 99.9% of our DNA, and of that 0.1% that is different, 0.01% that is different, 85% of that difference is actually between individuals. Only 5 to 10% of that little sliver is actually different between different kind of ethnicities or populations of people, right? And so the markers, the things that might identify you as Asian or African or white or something else, any of those kind of physical markers, things that might distinguish you from other people, they're really like just a tiny sliver of our genetic variability. And so again, they're meaningful to our eyes because we're visual creatures, right? And we can see that people are a different color than us. But again, genetically speaking, those differences are not very significant at all. They're tiny, right? They just look like a big difference to a creature that understands the world with its eyes, right? But really, it's not that big a difference. Let me give you a little more on that. I'm just going to jump ahead here because we've talked about these things. That's a lot. Okay, I'll talk about this. Is a lot of text, but I'll just jump through it really quickly. This is actually the sort of social construction of race, or the justification for race. And so, again, African Americans or Black Americans are a minoritized group, and they're have been identified as a race in the past and in the present. They first show up in the United States in about the 1600s, and so Africans are brought to North America not as colonists or not as explorers or people looking for a better life. They're brought there as servants, right, as slaves. And as the 1600s and 1700s go on, more and more are brought to the Americas to either farm cotton or to farm tobacco, right? And so these people are brought over as property, right, as things. And again, seeing them as less intelligent, less moral, less human, allows people to treat them as less, right? Yeah, and so again, this was useful is kind of a horrible word, but this was useful for Americans at the time because, again, they had just finished creating a nation based on freedom and equality for all, right? So freedom and equality for all, whoops, except these people here, right? Because these people we're going to own, and we're going to make them work on our farms so that we can earn money, right? And so, again, the race is created as a way to justify that treatment, right? And again, but it's not based in any kind of biology. Although scientists at the time and politicians at the time worked hard to find science to support this idea, right? So Thomas Jefferson, for instance, an American president who owned lots and lots of slaves, turned to science to try to explain the differences between races, right? And so there's lots of science that comes out at this period, and maybe I should put science in quotes here because it's not very good science, but science nonetheless, that tries to justify or tries to explain why there's differences in terms of races, right? And the problem with a lot of this science is that these scientists were going in and they'd kind of decided what they were going to find already, right? They kind of knew that they knew that there was this racial hierarchy. They knew there were these racial differences. And so they went about trying to explain it, right? And again, that's not really the way you should do science, right? The data has to inform the theory, right? Or the hypothesis. But in this case, yeah, the data has to inform the theory. But in this case, they already had the theory, right? They knew that white people were superior, and they knew that other races were not. And so they went about looking for evidence to prove this. And of course, they found evidence. I'm going to put in quotes as well. They found evidence for this. But again, it's junky science, right? It's not done very well. And they were making interpretations that they couldn't make based on what they knew, okay? So just as a few examples of this here, one of the perpetrators of this bad science is a guy named Johann Friedrich Blumenbach. And so Blumenbach did a study on 60 human skulls, okay? Now, we know a little bit about sample size. Does that sound like a good sample size when there's, probably, I don't know, millions and millions and millions of people on Earth? No, right? There's more than 60 countries, right? That's not even one skull from every country, right? And again, if you look at all of our skulls, if you could, turn on X-ray vision in this classroom, you would probably see that all of our skulls look a little bit different, right? There's a lot of variability to be had here because we come from different parts of the world, but also because we're all unique individuals and we're different genders, right? Even male and female skulls can be a little bit different. You can actually, to some degree, you can tell what the sex of a person is by the way their skull looks. And so there's lots of variability even just in this room. So 60 is a pretty small sample size to be generalizing about all of humanity. But Blumenbach did it anyway, right? And so he kind of founded this field called craniometry. And so he measured a bunch of skulls, he measured a bunch of crania, and he divided humans into 5 races back in 1779. And so these were his 5 races. So he named sort of whitish people Caucasians. All Asian people were classified under Mongolian. I think Malayan might have been like Southeast Asia and South Pacific peoples. All black or African people were classified under Ethiopian. And then basically all First Nations people in North and South America were classified under American. So he thought he could determine these 5 races based on 60 skulls. That's like 12 skulls per race. That's not in any way representative of humanity at all, but Blumenbach thought he could do it, right? He also had a couple of other interesting ideas that were informing his science, and one of them was he had this degenerative hypothesis of racial origins. And so he thought that Adam and Eve were white, okay? So he thought the first people ever created by God were white people, which is not surprising because if you look at a lot of artwork from, not even the period, but from before the period, from the Renaissance, Adam and Eve are pictured as white people. And so he thought that Adam and Eve were white people, the first people created by God were white. And so, well, how did it occur that we now had people of other color? And so he thought that the original kind of white people that were created through a process of too much sun or bad diet or whatever had actually degenerated. They had actually like degraded in some way. But they could get better, right? If they controlled their environment and ate a better diet, they could become white again. And then they could be better.
BS.
Yeah, BS and like holy cow, right? Not only racist, right, but actually ridiculous. And can you imagine? Do you suspect there was any evidence for this at all?
Who's that?
No.
Who's scientist? Which scientist?
This is Blumenbach thinking this in 1779, right? But again, this is all bonkers, right? And you can see there's some kind of religious biblical story and imagery mixed in, which no offense to the Bible, but the Bible cannot serve as scientific evidence usually. No offense to the Bible if there are believers listening, but biblical writing is not usually scientific evidence. And so, yeah, but he had some pre-existing prejudices, right? And so it's probably no surprise that those worked their way into his science, right? But it didn't stop craniometry from being important to Europeans in terms of classifying races and discriminating against them, right? I'm going to skip this slide because there's too much on there for now. Sorry, I got a little carried away when I was making some of these slides, and I put a lot of information in them, but maybe we don't need to dig that deep. There was also a thing called phrenology. Have you ever heard of phrenology? No? Phrenology was the kind of science, quote unquote, or pseudoscience, if you will, that said that you could know something about people's intelligence or people's character based on looking at the inside of their skull. Okay? So if you looked at the shape of their brain or if you looked at the inside of their skull, you could actually tell what they were like. You could tell how smart they were or how hardworking they were or how honest they were based on the shape on the inside of the skull. And Daniel's giving me a look like, what is this noise? And that's the look you should be giving because it's bananas, right? It's totally bananas. But again, scientists, quote unquote, were doing work on this sort of thing. And so here you can see the inside of the skull, or the parts of the brain are divided up. And this is kind of where you look for different traits, right? And so this is really small for me to read. Oh yeah, here we go. This is better. Yeah, so how cautious someone is. That's area number 12. So you look at that part of the brain to see if people are overly cautious. Benevolence, right? Are people kind and compassionate and giving towards others? Look at area 13, and then you'll be able to tell how compassionate someone is. Individuality, language, causality, alimentiveness. I guess that's the degree to which you get sick. I'm not really sure. I've never heard that word before. Secretiveness, combativeness. All of these things apparently you could tell by looking at the inside of the brain. Does this strike you as in any way accurate?
This is great science.
It's what?
Great science.
Great science, right? Very imaginative, very creative, but not based in fact in any way, right? This doesn't really correspond with the way that the brain works. A lot of these things that are, personality or temperament do not come from these areas of the brain. They come from other areas of the brain. And you can't tell by looking at the inside of someone's skull any of this stuff, right? It's all bananas. But of course, what do you think scientists found when they looked at the skulls of, let's say, white Caucasians versus black Africans? What do you think they found?
Same thing.
Yeah, oh look, the white people are, their brains look like all of the good things, and then the black skulls look like all of the bad things, right? Surprise. But of course, ridiculous, right? There's no truth to any of this. It's all fairy tale ridiculousness, right? There's no fact here at all. But of course, people did at the time believe that it was true. And so you might see, has anyone ever seen this? Sometimes you see these at Winners, like in the sort of home decor aisle. You'll see a head that's divided up into like numbered parts. That's what this is. It's connected to this pseudoscience of phrenology. But yeah, keep your eyes open and you'll see, sometimes you'll see these sold in stores as kind of a kitschy thing that you put in your house as a decoration. But yeah, number one, it's banana science. It's not in any way true. And it's kind of a little racist, I think, maybe. But I don't know. That's up to interpretation. But anyway, there was some bizarre science. Daniel says, I thought those were puzzles. Puzzling. They might have made them into puzzles, but that's where the idea comes from. It comes from phrenology, this kind of pseudoscience from the 1700s. So even though race has no biological foundation, scientists attempted to find it and found it because that's what they were looking for in the first place. But of course, as we know, whether race is biologically real or not, it was socially real, right? It was a socially constructed thing. People believed in it, and therefore it had significant consequences, right? And so these kind of prejudices and ideologies that are now backed up by science, they start to find their way into the way that governments operate. And so here in the United States, they start to, not here in the United States, there in the United States, they start to classify people according to this, right? So as you can see here, the term white first appears in late 17th century colonial law. So in the 1600s, colonial law is discriminating between white people and non-white people, right? That's starting to get written into the legal code of the nation, right? And we said that that's one of those beliefs of race-based societies, that you should write these things into the political and legal structures of the country. And so you can see it happening as early as the 1600s in the US. By 1790, people are asked to claim their race on the census. And so what's the census, by the way? What's the census? Census is where the government kind of tries to count people, right? So usually here in Canada, they send around like a questionnaire that you're supposed to fill out. You're legally required to fill it out. And so it's basically so the government knows how many people are in the country, kind of what age they are, how much money they're making, how many people are living in a house, and they can use all this data to kind of plan their spending and policy, right? So it's important to know, if you're going to run a country, it's important to know how many people live in your country and kind of how they're doing, right? So the census is like that. The Americans are doing one as early as 1790 and probably earlier, but they're being asked to claim their race on the census as early as 1790, and they still are, by the way. By 1825, the government is determining who is and is not Indian, right? And up here in Canada, they're doing the same thing. The government is determining who is and is not a First Nations person. So First Nations people kind of lose the legal right to determine who they are. The government will tell you if you're First Nations or not, but we'll get to that a little bit later. And again, as immigrants continue to arrive to the US in the 18th and 19th and 20th century, lots of people are coming to the US. They're seeing the Statue of Liberty, you know, the plaque on the Statue of Liberty, give us your tired and your poor and your huddled masses yearning to be free. Those huddled masses are coming to the US in huge numbers in this period. And so the sort of concept of whiteness becomes more kind of entrenched as those people who currently have power try to hold on to it, try to maintain it. And so by about 1865, slavery is abolished, right? So we know that the US fights a civil war over this, right? The southern states fight against the northern states. There's some other issues as well, but one of the major ones are the South wants to be able to continue to keep their slaves. The northern states say, no, you shouldn't do that anymore. We want to make it illegal. So the two sides fight it out. The North wins, right? The northern states win. And so Abraham Lincoln famously issues the Emancipation Proclamation, basically ending legal slavery in the United States. However, discrimination continues, right? So just because you end slavery doesn't mean that everything is now fine. A huge amount of racism and discrimination still occur. And in the South, people start to pass laws to ensure that black people kind of remain in their place, kind of at the bottom of society. And you'll hear these referred to as Jim Crow laws. Have you ever heard of Jim Crow laws? Even just the word? Yeah, and that's what it is, these laws in the South that, because the northern states said, okay, slavery is abolished, it's illegal, you can't do it anymore. And so southern states start to pass laws in order to make sure that, again, black people stay at the bottom. Yeah, and so as the 1800s continue on, more and more people come to the US, and whiteness is connected with certain benefits like citizenship. And so people are actually going to court trying to get the government to give them, to call them white. So whiteness is whiteness is a fluid concept in this, in this period. And so there's some points in United States history where Irish people and Italian people and Jewish people are not seen as white. And so Jewish people, I know, are sometimes seen as their own kind of separate group. But when we think of white people, do you think of Irish people? Yeah, they're pretty white, right? They're super white, right? If you take them out into the sun, they broil like a lobster, right? So they're super white. But at some points in the United States history, Irish people were not considered white, nor were Italians. There were other points in American history where Mexican immigrants were not considered as white, but then weren't again. So whiteness had somewhat to do with the color of your skin, but it also had to do with political and legal rights. And so a lot of people were trying to be classified as white because that gave you certain privileges that you didn't have if you weren't white. And so again, whiteness had something to do with the color of your skin, but not entirely, because again, Irish people are super white. Italian people are, in terms of skin color, reasonably white, but they were at various times considered non-white. And again, Mexican immigrants who today we kind of think of as non-white. We think of them as kind of Latinx. They were kind of considered as white sometimes, and then not, and then again, and not, and so it was very weird. So whiteness became not so much a race, but kind of a political and legal status. And so people kind of fought in order to gain that status because they wanted those political and legal rights. Okay, that's a lot of information. I'm going to skip right through it. I think it's time to take a little break. Should we take a little break?
Sure.
Okay, let's take a break. We'll come back and we'll talk a little more. So let me go back here to our article because there's a couple questions we didn't ask or answer, and I would like to answer them. Also, I'll just mention that some of those slides had a lot of information, and I think I'll delete those out. I think it's just too much. I don't want you to have to worry about them for like a quiz, because I think I got a little carried away in some places. So I'll take some of those out so it's not so bad, okay? Yeah, sometimes I get excited and I put a bunch of stuff in, and then I realize when I'm talking to you that, oh, it's too much. It's more than we need. Let's see. Oh, number 6, epistemic racism. What is epistemic racism? The what? Okay. So part of it, George and Sean, if you're with us, which you're not, but you will be shortly, right? Part of it has to do with the dominance of Western knowledge, right? So we said that the West kind of likes to see itself as the source of knowledge. The West likes to see itself as the sort of owner of science, if you will. And so we really privilege science as a way of knowing things, right? And again, in some ways there's nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't mean that there's no other way of knowing or there's no other source of information that might also be worthy of consideration, right? So part of it has to do with kind of a Western way of knowing, or the kind of privilege that people put on scientific knowledge, which again is not bad, but what else is it? Or what else is part of this epistemic racism thing? Right, so it's, I guess it devalues the sort of perspectives and information of others, right? So it assumes that Western knowledge and Western ways of seeing things are correct, right? One of the things that I guess I haven't used that example yet, but no, maybe I won't use it now. What else? What else is epistemic racism? Because I'm not totally clear on it yet. What's that? It's a tricky one. And actually, I'm just opening up the article so I can just scan it really quickly. Okay. Okay. This is a little bit of a tricky one, and probably not one that will come up against in the future. But the idea is that the West's kind of way of knowing things and sort of the traditional scientific, historic way of understanding things is to some degree racist, right? Because the idea is that science and knowledge and history is the creation of Western civilization, which is to some degree true and to some degree not. But because it was created by Europeans, by white Europeans, it therefore privileges Europeans in its use. Okay, so the idea that scientific values are in some ways the same as those of white European civilization. And so to use science, particularly to use science on other races or other cultures, can limit those perspectives. Man, that's complicated. Does that make any sense? Does that make any sense to you? A little bit? Okay. Let's leave that one for now because it's a tricky one. It's a really tricky one. What I would prefer you to know is, well, we definitely know what relational racism is. What's relational racism? Yeah, kind of everyday experiences of discrimination or racism that happen between people, right? So racist jokes, discrimination in hiring, any of that stuff, right? Things that maybe a president or a former president might say. Those things are kind of relational racism, and we're kind of used to, not used to, but we can easily see and recognize those things when they happen, right? So racism that occurs between people or groups, and usually it's pretty clearly identifiable, usually. Okay, structural racism. What is structural racism? That's an important one.
Economical, political features of racism.
Okay, so there's an economic and political aspect to this. What else would you say? Structural racism.
The law comes into place when the actual government sets out rules to systemically
Mm-hmm.
promote racism.
There you go. Yeah, so Avera says that, yeah, this is when, and I'll combine with Anna's here. So there's a political, there's a legal, there's an economic aspect to this, and it's basically where the government creates a system within a society that privileges some groups over others, okay? And there can be lots of ways that this can happen. Some of it can be very, very intentional, like Indian residential schools. Some of it can be unintentional, but the idea here is that the system is built that privileges some people and it disadvantages others based on race, okay? And so this one is a little more tricky to understand, but also tricky to see happening in real life, okay? So when someone, says a racist thing or sends around a racist joke, it's pretty clearly, you can pretty clearly point to it and say, yep, that's racism right there, right? You can see it. But the systemic stuff is much more difficult to see and understand, right? Because in many ways it can be almost invisible, particularly if you're in the dominant group. Because if you're in the dominant group, you don't encounter it, right? It doesn't slow you down. You don't trip over it. And so it's very easy to believe that it's not there. And so often you'll hear many people, a number of people say that, oh no, systemic racism isn't a thing, or thank God we don't have systemic racism here in Canada. But that's not true either, right? It is here, it's just sometimes it's harder to see. It's harder to kind of get a handle on. Again, when someone clearly says something racist, that's easy, right? You can just say, there's racism right there. But systemic racism is much more difficult to pin down and to identify. But it does exist. It's just harder to see, right? It's harder to define. Not define, but it's harder to figure out when it's happening. Now, to that end, I wanted to read one more thing, and it had to do with this. When we were talking about the creation of race in the United States, we said that, well, we didn't say this, but I think it should be said. The racial issues that the U.S. is experiencing now and has experienced in the past have a very long legacy, right? Black people were brought to America against their will, right? They were brought there as property. They were used to work on plantations and farms and make money for white plantation owners. And then slavery was abolished in 1965 after the Civil War. But again, the discrimination and racism continues, right? And so again, I think we know this already, but you can't end discrimination or prejudice with laws, right? Laws are a good start, but just because you say that you can't discriminate doesn't mean that no discrimination ever happens again, right? So there's a legal part to this, but there's also a social and a cultural part. And so, again, after slavery ended, and I'll probably cut that out too, even though slavery ended 160 years ago almost in the US, we're still seeing racial issues, right? We're still seeing demonstrations. We're still seeing violence against Black Americans. We're still seeing George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. We're still seeing Black Lives Matter, right? And this has been kind of a long process. And again, it's a legacy of how the United States started out and how it was born. It was born as an unequal country, right, in which one group of people owned and exploited another group of people. And so when that scenario ended, there was a lot of work to do in order to heal that relationship. And I think we can pretty clearly tell that it is not healed, right? There is still a lot of relational racism that goes on. There's some epistemic racism that goes on. And there's also a significant amount of structural racism that is inherent in the way a country like the US and Canada, like the US, operates, okay? So what I wanted to do is read this article very quickly that's called America's Long Overdue Awakening to Systemic Racism. And hopefully it's in Microsoft Teams, but I don't remember if I put it there or not, so I may need 20 seconds to put it there if it's not there. And what I would like you to do in reading this article is, as usual, try and figure out what the argument is, right? What is this author trying to convince us of, okay? The other thing I want you to pay attention to is, how does the author identify systemic racism? Is it there? Woo! Is it called this? It's called that. America's Long Overdue Awakening. Yeah, so how does the author identify systemic racism? So the question here is, how do we know it when it's happening, right? We know when a racist joke is happening or when a racist thing is happening, but how do we know systemic racism is happening? And for the third one, don't worry about the third one right now, just worry about the first two. What's the argument? What are the conclusion and the premises? And then pay attention to how this systemic racism is being identified. How do we know that it's happening? How do we know that it's there? Okay? I will, how much time is on my clock here? 4 minutes, that's not enough. I'll give you 12 minutes and then we'll see where we are, okay? There we go. Okay. Okay, people, how are you? How are you doing? Are you all the way through or not quite? Yes? No? Maybe so? Okay. Well, maybe what we'll do is we'll take the last few minutes to just finish reading this and try to see if you can get the argument organized. And then that's the first thing that we'll deal with tomorrow is what's the argument of this article, okay? So just take a few more minutes and finish reading. Online people, I'm going to sign you off now because nothing else exciting is going to happen, I don't think. So finish reading this. Make sure you try to come up with the argument, the conclusion, and the premises, and then we'll see you tomorrow, and that's what we'll start with. Okay. So online people, I'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.